Hi, I'm Ellie, and my story starts on the night my own parents shoved me outside in a thin nightgown and yelled, "Walk to your husband's house. Try not to freeze." All because I found out they drained my account, every last dollar of the $87,000 I saved, and handed it to my brother like it was theirs to give. I stood there shivering, snow biting through my skin, realizing this wasn't a mistake. This was who they had always been. And just when I thought I'd collapse, headlights cut through the storm. My husband stepped out, wrapped me in his coat, and whispered, "I'm taking you home." But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. They thought I would regret leaving, yet tomorrow, they're the ones who will be begging. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening and where are you right now? I'd love to know who's here with me tonight. I drove up the familiar hill after work, the kind of slow climb where the wind pushes against the car like it wants to turn you around. Duluth always felt colder after sunset. That evening, the air cut through my coat the moment I stepped out of the car, slipping under the collar and settling along my spine. I was still in my work slacks and a knit sweater, hair pulled back, hands stiff from holding the steering wheel too tight. Mom had called earlier, her voice clipped, asking me to stop by. She didn't explain why. She never did. And like every other time, I didn't question it. I just went. Their house sat near the end of a quiet street, wood siding faded by decades of Minnesota snow. My boots crunched over a sheet of ice as I made my way up the walkway. Warm light glowed through the windows, soft and inviting, which somehow made the cold pinch even harder. Inside the entryway, I brushed snow from my sleeves. The air held that familiar mix of laundry detergent and old radiator heat. Then my eyes landed on the wall to my left. 3 hooks. Dad's coat, Mom's coat, Kelvin's jacket. Not one for me. There never had been. For as long as I could remember, I'd drape my coat over a dining chair like a guest passing through. Not a daughter raised in this house. I set my coat down the same way tonight, smoothing the fabric out of habit. A faint ache tightened in my chest. Nothing dramatic, just that old reminder that I'd always been extra, not essential. Someone who fit around everyone else's needs. I stepped farther inside, hearing the murmur of voices from the kitchen. My boots squeaked faintly against the linoleum. "Finally," Kelvin said as I entered, his tone carrying more irritation than greeting. He didn't bother standing. He just tapped his foot against the table leg like he'd been waiting too long. Mom gave me a small smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Dad barely looked up from the newspaper. I took the chair next to the counter, sliding into it quietly, like I was trying not to take up space. The room felt too warm, almost stuffy. Maybe it was the heat, maybe it was them. I tried to relax my shoulders, but my mind drifted the way it always did when I sat here, circling back to how things used to work in our family, or how they still worked. Growing up, every savings account, every bond, every school fund, my parents kept it all safe. That was the word Mom loved to use, safe. As if I'd somehow misplaced my own future if she didn't hold on to it. I didn't question it when I was young, but even when I turned 18, 19, 20, they insisted certain things were easier if they managed them. "That's how our family works," Mom would say. And I let it happen. I worked long hours, saved little by little, and deposited what I could into accounts my parents swore were more secure under their watch. I thought I was being responsible. I didn't see the pattern for what it was. Kelvin, on the other hand, couldn't keep money in his hands for more than a week. But every time he stumbled, I was the one expected to cushion the landing. I remembered one moment clearly. He'd come over unannounced years ago, eyes wide with desperation, asking for cash to fix his truck. He'd promised he'd pay it back. That promise evaporated the minute he walked out the door. No apology, no explanation. And my parents? They defended him. He's under pressure, Mom said. He needs support, Dad added, as if my paycheck existed solely to patch my brother's mistakes. I never argued. I swallowed every slight, every assumption. And somewhere deep down, I started believing that my steadiness made me the one who should bend. But sitting there that night, with Kelvin staring at me like my time belonged to him, something inside me shifted, tiny, almost unnoticeable, but real. A whisper of a question formed. Why do I always say yes? I folded my hands on the table, waiting for someone to speak. Kelvin cleared his throat. You took long enough getting here. His tone had that edge, the one implying I'd failed him just by not arriving sooner. I kept my voice level. I came straight from work. Yeah, well, this is important, he snapped, leaning back in his chair like he owned the room. I'm in a situation, credits messed up, bills piling up, and I need help. There it was. The familiar script. He didn't even try to soften it. Mom looked at me expectantly, eyes wide with that silent message I knew too well. Fix this for him. Be the good one. Hold the family together. Dad lifted his chin slightly, watching me over his glasses, not asking, assuming. Their silence pressed against me harder than the cold outside. It wasn't neutral. It was a demand. Kelvin leaned forward, voice sharpening. You're the only one who can pull me out of this. Again. I felt the room shrink, the air thinning around me. My pulse thudded in my ears, steady and slow, the way it always did when I was cornered, but trying to look calm. I inhaled gently before speaking. What exactly do you need this time? The look on my mother's face made something low in my stomach twist. The moment I asked what they needed, my mother's expression shifted in a way I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was something quieter, a kind of uneasy resolve. She reached toward the end of the table, pulled out an envelope, and placed it in front of me with a slow, careful motion. The room had fallen still, the evening light fading toward night outside, turning the windows into dark mirrors. I didn't touch the envelope right away. I just stared at it. My mother folded her hands together like she was preparing for a confession, while Kelvin huffed under his breath as if all of this was taking too long. Dad leaned back in his chair, the lamplight carving lines across his face, making him look older and somehow smaller. I finally slid the envelope toward me and opened the flap. The paper inside was thick, the kind banks use for printed statements. My eyes scanned the page once, then again. I didn't understand what I was looking at first. The numbers didn't make sense. My vision tightened, narrowing to the total printed on the bottom line, 0. The account I'd been contributing to for years. Nothing remained. For a second, I wondered if I misread it. I lifted the page closer to the lamp. Same numbers, same empty balance. My stomach dipped as if the floor leaned away from me. The house felt smaller, the air heavier, like everything was pressing me deeper into the chair. I steadied my breath and asked, "Where is the money?" My voice came out low, almost calm, though inside everything was shaking. My mother's fingers twitched. She cleared her throat, but her words didn't carry much strength. "We needed to move things around," she said, forcing a soft tone. "For the family." Dad shifted in his seat, pushing the salt shaker an inch to the left, as if that tiny adjustment carried great importance. He spoke without looking at me. "You didn't require that much put aside. Kelvin needed it more." The words didn't hit all at once. They landed piece by piece, each one colder than the last. My pulse beat hard in my ears. Something in me reached for a reasonable explanation, maybe an emergency, maybe a misunderstanding, but even before I asked again, the truth settled in my chest like ice. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an unplanned transfer. They emptied the account deliberately. I lowered the paper onto the table, smoothing the edge with my thumb. "You took everything," I said, the words barely above a whisper. Mom's lips tightened, and she blinked rapidly like she expected me to understand. "We're trying to help your brother get back on his feet. He's working towards something important. He can't do it alone." Kelvin leaned back with a smug tilt in his posture. "I'm the one putting myself out there," he said. "You've always had extra anyway. It's only fair I get more support. I'm the one building a future." The way he said it, like he was justifying a debt I supposedly owed, cut deeper than the missing money. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't even unsure. He believed it. Truly believed he was entitled to what I had earned. And the worst part was that my parents agreed with him without hesitation. I swallowed slowly, keeping my voice level. "That account was mine. I put the money there. I worked for it." Dad sighed, the sound full of disappointment rather than guilt. "Family helps family. That's what we do." Mom added, "You have your husband. You're comfortable. You're not raising kids. You can build that money again. But Kelvin, he's under real pressure. You should want to help him." There it was, the familiar script: reshape my boundaries into selfishness, twist my silence into agreement, turn my loss into an offering I should be proud to give. They were so used to me absorbing everything that they didn't even hide the manipulation anymore. My throat felt tight, but I didn't cry. The hurt sat too deep, too old, settling into the space between my ribs like it had been waiting there for years. I studied their faces, the expectation in Mom's eyes, the careful detachment in Dad's posture, Kelvin's impatient smirk. They were waiting for me to nod, to say what I always said: "I'll help. It's okay. I understand." But something in me shifted, a small, sharp fracture inside, spreading like a crack along cold glass. I set the statement down, smoothing the corner once more. "You should have talked to me," I said quietly. Mom gave me a look that carried more frustration than remorse. "We didn't want to overwhelm you with details. Besides, it's for the good of all of us." "All of us," I repeated, my voice thin. "Or just him?" Kelvin scoffed. "Come on, don't make this dramatic. You're fine. You'll bounce back." Years of conditioning wrapped around me like invisible ropes. Be the steady one, the forgiving one, the reliable one. But tonight those ropes finally pulled too tight. As they waited for me to say the words they wanted, something inside me cracked for the first time in my life. The moment something inside me cracked, I felt it travel through my chest like a quiet break in hardened ice. I didn't say a word. I didn't sigh. I didn't argue. I simply pushed my chair back, and the scrape across the hardwood echoed through the dining room like a warning neither of my parents wanted to hear. I stood slowly, steadying myself with one hand on the table's edge. The air in the room shifted. My mother's eyes followed me with a mix of confusion and caution. My father watched from behind the lamplight, as if waiting for me to follow the old script. Kelvin only rolled his eyes, already impatient, muttering something about how I was being dramatic. I still kept quiet. Silence felt stronger than anything I could have said in that moment. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the shock settling deeper into my bones. My breath wouldn't fully steady, like my ribs refused to make more room. I turned away from all three of them and walked out of the dining room, feeling their stares on my back. I moved down the hallway where the light dimmed, the quiet thickening around me. With each step, another piece of my composure slipped out of place until my knees felt weak. The house had always been too small, too old, too filled with things that belonged to everyone except me. And now, with the night growing colder outside and the snow beginning to drift across the dark windows, I felt that smallness close in. My childhood bedroom door was cracked open. That thin line of darkness pulled me toward it. When I stepped inside, the smell of old quilts and cedar struck me right in the chest. I hadn't been in here in years, and yet everything felt familiar enough to make my throat tighten. A groan of memory opened in me, deep and heavy. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the room wrap around me. It was too quiet, the type of quiet that makes old wounds stir. Out of nowhere, a memory rose like a wave I couldn't hold back. I was 12 again, bright-eyed and ready to spend the birthday money I'd tucked into an envelope. I remembered running down the hallway with the envelope clutched in my hand, excited because I wanted to buy a sketch set I'd been saving for. Dad stood near the kitchen, talking with Kelvin about new cleats he needed. Kelvin wasn't asking, he was demanding. Dad was getting irritated, telling him the cleats were too expensive, and he'd already outgrown the pair they got last season. I walked in holding the birthday envelope. Mom looked at me, then at the envelope, then back at Kelvin. She smiled at my brother first. "Well, that could cover most of the cost," she said, nodding toward my hands. I hadn't even opened my mouth. I hadn't offered anything. Dad pulled the envelope from me before I understood what was happening. I remember just standing there, frozen in one spot, staring at the empty air where the envelope had been. "You're sensible," Mom said that day. "You're not one to fuss. You don't need all that. Your brother needs it more." Her voice was sweet, as if she were doing me a kindness. I remembered how I swallowed my questions, how I convinced myself that being the one who could go without was something to be proud of, something expected, something good. Sitting in that same room now, with the walls still covered in faded wallpaper, the memory settled over me like a heavy blanket. It wasn't the money back then, it was the message. I had been trained, gently, consistently, almost lovingly, to be the one who didn't get to keep anything of her own. I stood and walked toward the window. Snow had begun to collect on the sill, the flakes catching in the streetlight outside. The night deepened, quiet but unkind. I turned back to the bed and sat again, letting the weight of remembrance pull more truth forward. College fund adjusted because Kelvin needed a car. My graduation skipped in favor of his latest crisis. The down payment I saved for my first apartment borrowed permanently when he totaled that car and needed help again. Christmas mornings where he got the gifts, wrapped in the big boxes, and I got something quick, something practical, something chosen at the last minute. Mom's "you understand" whispered like a blessing. Dad's "be grateful you don't need much." I had hidden these moments from myself for so long that now, with the shock of the missing savings still raw, they resurfaced like stones rising in thawing ground. I leaned forward and placed my face in my hands, letting myself breathe through the sting behind my eyes. I wasn't crying, not exactly. It was something heavier, something that sat just long enough to make me swallow hard. When I lifted my head, I noticed a shoe box under the bed, one of those old floral print boxes with the lid that never quite fit. I reached down and pulled it out, brushing dust from the top. Inside were my report cards, childhood photos, ribbons from school events. Things I had forgotten still existed. But tucked beneath a stack of old drawings was a folded letter addressed to me. My name was written in a script I recognized immediately, my scholarship advisor from high school. My hands softened as I opened it. It was dated the summer before college, congratulating me on receiving a grant to help cover educational expenses. A grant my parents told me I never earned. A grant they insisted I just missed by a few points. Several $1,000s. Gone before I even knew it existed. The realization cut cleaner than anything downstairs had. This wasn't about one account. It wasn't about one decision or one moment. This had been happening my entire life. My history, my chances, my milestones had been rearranged by two people who insisted they loved me. They rewrote things so I wouldn't push back. So I wouldn't know what I lost. So I wouldn't expect more. The anger didn't explode. It didn't roar. It rose like heat in my chest, slow but sure, mixing with something sharper, something steadier than grief. I stood up with the letter in my hand, finally understanding that this wasn't misfortune or misunderstanding. It was a lifetime of choices they made against me. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I stepped into the hallway again. The letter was still in my hand, edges pressed into my palm, warming under my fingers. I walked toward the stairs, each step slow and measured, feeling as if the whole house was listening. When I reached the bottom, they were already gathered in the living room. It was almost uncanny, like they'd arranged themselves for the next scene. My father stood near the doorway with his arms folded tight. My mother clutched the sleeves of her sweater, her shoulders lifted like she expected a storm. Kelvin lounged on the couch with his phone in hand, tapping the screen with a bored rhythm that cut through the tense quiet. I paused at the last step. My pulse thudded so loudly I could hear it in my ears, but my thoughts, those were clear. Clear in a way they hadn't been in years. It felt as if the letter had unlocked something in me, something I'd buried so deep I forgot it had ever existed. No one spoke, they waited, and I waited back, letting the silence stretch until even Kelvin finally lifted his eyes. My father broke first. "All right," he said, his voice sharp. "You need to calm down before you embarrass yourself." Embarrass myself. The same tone he used when I cried as a child. The same tone he used when Kelvin messed up and they needed me to smooth it over. I stood still. I didn't even blink. The living room was warm, but the kind of warmth that felt fake. Heat from a space heater, not the kind that settles into walls built with love. Outside, wind brushed against the house, rattling the windows with short bursts. The temperature was dropping fast, and somehow the cold felt kinder than the three people staring at me. My mother stepped forward just enough to place herself between me and Dad's glare. Her voice softened, but the softness was brittle, stretched thin. "It was just money," she said. "Your brother needed it. Just money. $87,000. Years of saving. My future. My security." She said it like it was a spare coat I'd left behind. Kelvin let out a small laugh under his breath. "She always overreacts," he muttered, shaking his head like he was the one who needed patience. I felt a sting in my chest, not sharp, but deep, like something old was being pressed again. Their words moved around me in slow waves, each one finding a place to land. But instead of breaking, something inside me began to harden. My mother lifted her chin, and that was when she said the thing that cut deeper than the missing money. "You don't have children," she said. "You don't have real responsibilities. Of course we prioritize Kelvin." The room fell silent for a beat so long, it felt endless. I looked at her, really looked at her, at the woman who raised me, the woman who taught me to share, to stay quiet, to swallow needs before they turned into words. She didn't look ashamed. She didn't even look conflicted. She looked like she had finally spoken out loud, something she'd believed for decades. My father stepped closer, his voice low. "You should be grateful you can help him. That's your role." My role. There it was again, assigned to me without my consent, like a job title I never applied for. A slow heat moved through me, not a flash of anger, but something steadier, like coals catching. "You're going to stay quiet about this," my father continued, lowering his voice further. "Kelvin doesn't need the stress, neither do we." My mother added quickly, "We expect you to behave. Don't make this harder." Behave, like a child, like a servant, like a resource they owned. Kelvin shrugged, barely looking up. "Just drop it, Ellie. It's done." Done. That word hit me harder than all the others. The walls felt too close. the air too thin, their expectation too heavy. My father gave one last line, as if sealing the room shut. "You're part of this family. Start acting like it." I lifted my eyes to all three of them, and for the first time in my life, I saw them without the filter of longing or obligation. If I stayed one more minute, they would cut me down the same way they had since childhood. Quietly, calmly, confident that I wouldn't fight back. I felt my breath steady, not calm, but certain. I looked at all three of them and realized that if I stayed another minute, they would break me the way they always have. I moved toward the front door because it felt like the only place left with air. My fingers tightened around the letter, the edges bending slightly in my palm. I wasn't thinking of a destination. I just knew I had to get away from their stares, from the pressure closing in on me like a vice. When I reached the entryway, the cold pushed through the spaces around the frame. It wasn't a breeze, it was sharper, almost warning me that stepping outside without a plan would be brutal. My hand rested on the knob. I tried to steady myself, tried to breathe through the shaking in my chest. I had spent my whole life taking deep breaths before doing the hard thing. This time, the air wouldn't stay in my lungs long enough to help. Then Dad's voice landed behind me. "Where do you think you're going?" He didn't raise his tone. He didn't have to. That question had stopped me my whole life. It always meant, get back in line. I froze. The part of me that wanted to run wavered, the way a person hesitates at the edge of cold water. All those years of stepping aside, making room, smoothing things over, they held me there more effectively than any locked door. Mom stepped between me and the exit. "You're not leaving in the middle of a family conversation." Her voice carried the same softness she used when I was a child, the one that always made me hand over what I had without asking why. Kelvin moved in behind me, blocking the hallway like he was guarding something valuable. I wasn't sure if that something was the family story they wanted to keep intact or the access they were afraid of losing. My attempt to walk out was gone in a breath. The walls felt closer again. Mom reached for my arm gently, as if she were comforting me. "Ellie, honey, we know you're overwhelmed. Let's just talk." For a split second, something inside me stirred. That old instinct. The tiny hope that maybe this time she meant it, maybe this time she saw my pain, pulled me toward her voice. A part of me still wanted my mother to be someone I could lean on. It's strange how hope can survive even after years of being stepped on. But then she continued, "If you'd stop being so dramatic and understand your brother's situation, we wouldn't have to raise our voices." Everything in me tightened. That single sentence wiped out whatever softness had flickered in her tone. Kelvin scoffed behind me. "Yeah, nobody else reacts like this." There it was, the real intention. They weren't trying to calm me. They were trying to reset me. I stepped back from Mom's touch. My arm felt colder where her hand had been. Dad let out a breath. "Sit down." I didn't move. He shrugged, almost casual. "Fine. You should hear the rest anyway." That sentence sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "We didn't just give him the $87,000, he said. "Kelvin needed help with his loans too." Molt. Mind stalled. "What loans?" I asked, though some part of me already knew the answer wouldn't make sense. Kelvin's eyes widened just enough to betray him. Mom shot Dad a quick glare, sharp, panicked, but it didn't matter. The truth was already out. Dad continued like the details didn't matter. "You've always done fine. You didn't need all of it." And suddenly, I wasn't in that hallway anymore. I was standing in every moment something of mine disappeared. The scholarship money I was told I never got. My savings in my early 20s that, mysteriously, came up short. The deposits I made during college that didn't match the balances later. All of it lined up too neatly. The pattern was so obvious now, I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it sooner. I stared at the letter in my hand. My fingers trembled, not from fear this time, but from the weight of the truth pressing down on me. I wasn't the responsible daughter they trusted with money. I was the source they depended on, the safety net, the well they kept drawing from without ever asking if there was anything left. I stumbled back a step, then another, until my shoulders brushed the wall. My vision blurred at the edges. My knees weakened. Mom followed me, her voice tight. "You're making a scene." Those words struck harder than anything else that night. Not because they were loud, but because they were familiar. She had said the same thing when I cried at 13, after they gave away the savings I'd earned mowing lawns. She said it again when Kelvin wrecked the car I helped pay for. And again at 23, when they used my apartment deposit to bail him out of something they insisted I didn't need to know about. "You used me," I whispered. The silence that followed wasn't guilt. It wasn't shock. It was annoyance, like I had said something rude at a dinner table. Kelvin muttered, "You're being ridiculous." Outside, the storm groaned against the siding, the wind pushing snow against the steps. Inside, something shifted. Not in them, nothing shifted in them, but in me. Because I suddenly understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't one bad night. This was a lifetime of them taking and me letting them. And in that realization, something inside me gave way. Not broken completely, but cracked wide enough that the next thing they did, whatever it was, would push me past a point I had never approached before. The moment I understood something worse was coming, my breath caught. I didn't know what they planned to do, only that whatever line they crossed next would change everything between us. I stood there, still holding the letter, when Dad's voice cut through the hallway. "Hand me your phone." At first, I thought I misheard him. After everything, after the shouting, after the truth spilled out and shattered the room, this was what he chose to say? But then he stepped forward with his palms stretched out, like it was the most natural demand in the world. Mom hovered behind him, wringing her hands in that way she liked to pretend meant concern. Kelvin shifted closer to the door as if he was the gatekeeper. Dad repeated himself, "We don't need you calling anyone. This stays between us." The words slammed into me harder than I expected. Not because they were loud, but because they were strategic. They wanted to cut me off from anyone who might help me. My pulse jumped. I wrapped my fingers around my phone, pulling it closer to my chest without even thinking. "No," I said inside my own head first, testing it silently. The idea felt unfamiliar, like holding something fragile I didn't know I owned. I took one small step back, just enough for them to notice. Mom whispered, "Ellie, don't do this." Kelvin scoffed, "Just give it to him. Stop dragging this out." But something inside me had shifted. Maybe it was the letter. Maybe it was the years of being drained until there was nothing left. Maybe it was the storm outside reminding me that pain can also wake you up. I lifted my chin. "No!" Their reaction was instant. 3 pairs of eyes widening for different reasons. Dad's narrowed with irritation, Mom's filled with a performative panic, and Kelvin looked at me like I'd grown a second head. I felt the ground steady under my feet. The word had weight this time. Not shaky, not small, solid. Dad stepped closer, too close. "You're not leaving this house until we finish talking." Talking. That was his word for cornering, his word for directing the story in a way that always favored Kelvin. Mom moved around behind me, closing off another escape route. Her voice turned sharp. "You're overreacting and embarrassing us." Kelvin planted himself near the doorframe, arms folded across his chest. "You're not going anywhere." It became a 3-sided wall, the kind of wall they'd built around me my whole life, without me noticing the bricks piling up. Dad reached for my wrist. I flinched back, pulling my arm away before he could grab it. His eyes flashed, like he wasn't used to resistance. Fear shot through me so fast, it felt like my body wanted to run before my mind caught up. But then something else followed right behind the fear. Something stronger, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. "No," I said again, firmer. Mom snapped, "Stop acting like a victim." That line sliced through me, not because its year was new, but because it was so old, so tired, so expected. Kelvin muttered to Dad, "Just take the phone already." Then he reached for my arm. I jerked away fast, stepping back toward the front foyer. "Don't touch me," I said, louder this time. My voice echoed down the hallway. For a split second, it stunned them. The wind slammed against the house, rattling the windows hard enough to make the living room lamp flicker. The storm was at full force outside, the kind that made the world go quiet except for the sound of wind trying to tear the siding loose. Dad lunged again. I moved before he could reach me, slipping past his shoulder, skirting the edge of the hallway furniture, my heart pounding so hard it vibrated through my ribs. I reached the foyer. Cold air pressed in through the frame. Sharp, bitter, biting. My fingers closed around the door handle. Behind me, the sound of 3 voices crashed together. My name shouted like an order. I didn't turn around. I pulled the door open, letting the freezing wind rush in and strike my face, waking every part of me like a challenge. When all 3 of them shouted my name at once, the sound crashed into my back like a wave. But my hand was already on the door, and the cold outside was a sharper truth than anything inside that house. I didn't turn around. I pushed the door wider, letting the winter air surge in until it filled the foyer and stung the corners of my eyes. The wind struck my face first, then wrapped around my shoulders like it wanted to pull me forward. Snowflakes blew inside, scattering across the floor. The lights flickered overhead as the storm rattled the siding. Behind me, their voices rose again, each one trying to pull me back in for different reasons. Dad barked, "Get back in here, now!" Mom's voice cracked into something close to a hiss. "Eleanor, stop this!" Kelvin muttered, "She's really doing it." I stepped onto the threshold and stayed there, half in the house and half in the storm. My breath billowed out in white clouds. The cold grounded me, kept my thoughts clear, even while chaos swirled behind me. Then it started. A wall of accusations hit me from every angle. "You're overreacting. You're ungrateful. You've never done enough for this family. You think you're better than everyone." Their voices layered over each other until it was hard to tell who said what. It wasn't a conversation. This was a coordinated attack meant to drown me. The gusts of wind carried their words out into the yard, but inside my head, they echoed with brutal clarity. Dad stepped forward, trying to shut the door behind me. I pressed my palm against the wood, stopping it from closing. I could feel my heart racing, but there was something steadier beneath it. Anger, yes, but also a strange calm I hadn't felt in years. Kelvin moved closer, spreading his arms like he was performing for an audience. "You really want the truth?" he said, voice loud over the storm. "You've always been the unstable one. Mom and Dad only ever gave you responsibilities so you'd feel included." His words hit like a punch, not because I believed him, but because I could hear how long he'd been waiting to say something like that. He enjoyed it. He wanted it to land. Dad wasn't far behind. "We didn't tell you about the money because you panic. You're not strong enough to handle real decisions." Mom nodded, her arms crossed tight. "It's better when Kelvin manages things. He understands family loyalty." Family loyalty. That phrase twisted something deep inside me. It was the same line they used every time they needed to justify draining me. Every time they wanted me quiet. Every time they wanted Kelvin comfortable at my expense. For a second, the world tilted. like the floor might drop out from under me. My throat tightened, and the words they threw at me tangled together in my mind. It was a feeling I knew too well, like being shoved into a dark corner you've lived in for years without realizing it. But the cold wind kept me upright. I drew a slow breath and straightened my spine. "No," I said, almost softly. "You don't get to define me anymore." The air changed instantly. Dad froze. Mom blinked hard. Kelvin's smirk faltered. I spoke again, louder this time. "I'm not staying in this house, and you're not touching me." Those words landed like a spark in dry grass. Dad's jaw locked. "You're not leaving until you stop this nonsense." "I am leaving," I said, steady. "And you're not putting your hands on me." Mom lunged forward, not to strike, but to grab my arm and drag me back inside. I stepped sideways and she stumbled. Kelvin shouted, "She's losing it! Grab her!" The hallway filled with overlapping voices, footsteps, frantic movement. The storm roared behind me, the living room lights flickered, and I could feel their panic rising. I wasn't the obedient daughter anymore. I wasn't the quiet one. That terrified them more than anything else that happened tonight. Then Kelvin did something I never expected. He grabbed his phone. At first I thought he was calling someone, but when he lifted it, pointing the camera straight at my face, my breath stopped. "Oh, look," he said, voice dripping with cruelty. "Let's show everyone how insane Ellie gets when she doesn't get her way." Mom didn't stop him. Dad stepped aside, giving him space like he approved. The cold hit harder when I realized the truth. They were willing to humiliate me publicly to regain control. Kelvin tapped the screen. The red recording light blinked. I stood there in my nightgown, the wind whipping my hair around, snowflakes sticking to my skin. They wanted the world to see a woman falling apart. But I wasn't falling apart. I stayed still. The storm howled around us. Kelvin waited for me to scream or cry or look ashamed. I didn't give him any of that. I looked directly into the camera, calm, sharp, and colder than the night outside, and said, "You have no idea what you've done." Kelvin's confidence faltered. His arm dipped slightly. Mom moved closer, uncertainty finally cracking through her mask. Dad stared at me like he was finally seeing someone he didn't recognize. And in that fragile second, the whole house shifted. Not because of them, but because headlights cut through the storm outside, sweeping across the porch and landing directly on us. A car was pulling into the driveway. The moment those headlights broke through the sheets of snow, something in the air shifted. Not inside the house, inside me. I'd been standing in the doorway with the storm clawing at my legs, my family behind me like a wall tightening by the second. But when I turned toward the driveway and saw that beam of light slice across the yard, I knew exactly who had come. The cold hit me harder as I stepped fully outside. The wind wrapped around my bare skin, sharp enough that it stole whatever breath I had left. Snow swirled so thick it felt like walking into a curtain of ice. Through it, a car door slammed. Heavy, quick footsteps crunched over the frozen ground. My husband's silhouette emerged first. The broad outline of his winter coat, the way he leaned forward against the wind, scanning for me with panic tightening every muscle in his body. Even from yards away, I could see the horror on his face the moment he recognized me standing there, shivering in nothing but a nightgown. Behind me, my mother hissed my name like she was trying to pull it back inside. My father muttered something sharp under his breath. Kelvin hovered at my back, restless and irritated, like the storm had ruined whatever performance he'd been trying to stage. But all of that fell away the moment my husband called my name through the wind. The sound of it felt like someone opening a window in a burning room. Air, relief. Something that reminded me I was still human. I stepped toward him. I didn't get far. Dad snapped, "If you walk to him, don't come back." His voice cracked like the threat had been sitting on his tongue all night. Mom swung the door all the way open, her frustration exploding. Then go! Freeze out there if you want to act wild! But Kelvin was the one who moved. He shoved me. It wasn't enough to throw me, but it was enough to send me stumbling off the top step, down onto the snow-packed walkway. My feet slipped. My arms flew out to catch myself. For a second, my whole body went weightless. Then the cold swallowed me. Snow rushed up my legs, soaking the thin fabric instantly. The wind cut through me as if I wasn't wearing anything at all. My breath hitched, my knees buckled, and the sound of the door slamming behind me felt like someone snapping a trap shut. I was alone in the storm, on purpose. The danger hit me next, not emotionally but physically. The thin cotton nightgown clung to my skin. My teeth began to chatter so violently it hurt. I couldn't feel my fingers right away. My hair whipped across my face. Each gust of wind felt like it was peeling layers off me. Through the roar of the storm, I heard my husband shouting my name again. He ran toward me, slipping on the ice, catching himself, then closing the distance between us as fast as he could. The second he reached me, his coat dropped around my shoulders like a blanket of warmth sent from another world. He scooped me up before I had time, or strength, to resist. "You're freezing," he said, voice breaking. "You shouldn't be out here. What happened? Who put you outside?" I couldn't speak yet. My jaw shook too hard. He turned toward the house, eyes blazing. Dad had cracked the door open slightly, as if he needed to see whether I'd gotten back up on my own. Mom hovered behind him. Kelvin's silhouette shifted somewhere in the background, but he didn't come out. My husband marched toward them with me in his arms, each step fueled by a fury I'd never seen from him. Controlled, contained, deadly steady. "What did you do to her?" he asked, his voice low enough to terrify even the wind. Dad tried to look calm. "She's overreacting." Mom forced a shaky smile. "She needed some air." Kelvin folded his arms and muttered, "She walked out on her own." My husband stared at them like he was counting every lie in real time. "In this storm," he said, "with no coat, no shoes. Are you hearing yourselves?" Mom tried again, voice cracking. "She needed to cool off." He let out a short laugh, one with no humor at all. Then he reached into his pocket. "I heard everything," he said. "Every word." Dad blinked. "What do you mean?" "When I pulled up, I saw you screaming at her from the doorway. I heard the threats. I heard you pushing her out, and I recorded it." The wind quieted just enough for the silence to hit like a blow. My mother's lips parted. My father's jaw twitched. Kelvin took half a step back, like the ground shifted under him. My husband held the phone steady, like it was a shield. "If any of you ever touch her money again, or even think about contacting her to ask for anything, I'll hand this to an attorney before the day is over." Their faces drained of color. The storm kept blowing around us, snow swirling under the porch lights, but for the first time all night, I felt the temperature inside my chest change, like something thawed, not because the world got warmer, but because I wasn't standing alone anymore. My husband tightened his coat around me, shielding me completely as he turned toward the car. His arm was firm across my back. My head rested against his shoulder, and I let myself lean, finally letting the strength leave my legs, because his were steady enough for both of us. Behind us, the door creaked open again. And just as he lifted me into the car, Mom shouted one last thing, a sentence so cold, so sharp, it cut deeper than the wind. As he carried me toward the car, Mom shouted one last thing that sliced through the wind sharper than the cold itself. I didn't even turn back. I couldn't. But the words chased me anyway, riding the storm right into my chest. She screamed that I would regret leaving, because tomorrow, she said, everything would come back on them. The tone wasn't grief. It wasn't fear. It was accusation. It was a promise that somehow, even after everything, they would turn themselves into the victims. My husband didn't slow. He pulled the passenger door open, lowered me into the seat, and blasted the heater before my hand could reach for it. The vents hummed to life, pushing warm air toward my legs, which were still blotched red from the cold. I couldn't stop shaking. Part of it was the storm. Part of it was the shock. But most of it was the unreal feeling of being carried away, literally, from the place I once believed was safe. He slid into the driver's seat, pulled the door shut, and for the first time all night, there was silence. Not the suffocating silence from inside that house. This was the kind of silence where no one demanded anything from me. I lifted my hand slightly and caught my reflection in the window. Hair tangled, skin flushed, eyes red but somehow clearer than ever. For the first time in years, I saw myself without their version of me layered over the surface. No role, no responsibility, no script to follow, just me. My husband reached over and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You're okay now," he murmured. "I've got you." And for a few breaths, I let that be true. Warmth hit me the moment the urgent care nurse wrapped my hands in heated towels. The room smelled like antiseptic and coffee, strangely comforting. I sat on the exam bed while my husband paced beside me, too restless to sit down. The nurse asked what happened. I didn't answer at first. My husband did. "They put her outside," he said, voice cracking halfway. "They shoved her out during a storm. She barely had anything on." Hearing him say it out loud, it changed something inside me. I had been floating in disbelief, wondering if maybe I had exaggerated it. That old reflex was still there. Minimize, excuse, rationalize. But his voice held no confusion, no hesitation. The nurse looked horrified. "You're lucky she didn't collapse out there." Lucky. That was the word. Something in me finally let go. Not loudly, just a quiet stream of tears that kept falling no matter how many times I blinked. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't oversensitive. I wasn't imagining what they did. It was real. It was wrong. And it wasn't the first time they hurt me. It was simply the first time I couldn't pretend it didn't matter. My husband sat beside me then, taking my hand again. "You're safe now. We'll get through this. You're not going back there, ever." And this time, I didn't argue with him. I didn't try to soften it. I just nodded. By the time morning came, the storm had passed. Sunlight spilled across the bedroom carpet in long, pale stripes. I lay under a pile of blankets, every joint heavy but finally warm. My phone buzzed somewhere on the nightstand, a sound that instantly put tension back in my shoulders. I picked it up, 3 missed calls from Dad, 2 from Mom, 1 text from Kelvin. "Call them. They're freaking out." My husband was sitting in the armchair near the window, reading something on his laptop. He looked up the moment he saw the phone in my hand. "You don't have to respond," he said softly. "I know," I whispered, but part of me needed to hear what they said. Dad's voicemail came first. "We need to talk. Call us back. It's urgent." Then Mom's. "You misunderstood everything. We didn't mean for any of this to happen. Please, call me. We need your help." "We need your help." Of course. Kelvin's message wasn't any better. "Just call them, Ellie. They're making a mess out of this." I exhaled slowly and let the phone rest on my lap. My husband closed the laptop. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I sent the recording to an attorney friend last night. I didn't file anything. I just wanted to know what our options were." My heart tightened. "And?" He rubbed his forehead. "He said if they try to touch your accounts again, if they threaten you, or if they come after you in any way, it could become a legal matter very quickly. They could face financial investigation, restraining orders, A whole list of things. I didn't say anything at first, but it clicked. That's why my family was calling. Not because they finally realized what they did, but because they finally realized what it could cost them. They're only reaching out because something scared them, my husband added gently. For once, I didn't defend them. For once, I didn't make excuses. They're afraid of losing what they took from me, I said. He nodded. Exactly. I stared at the wall for a moment, letting everything settle inside me. The sadness, the exhaustion, the small flicker of empowerment that kept growing. What do you want to do? He asked. It was the simplest question, but maybe the most important one I'd ever been asked. I thought about revenge, about exposing them, about lawsuits, about making them answer for every lie. The temptation flickered, but it died quickly. Not because they didn't deserve it, but because revenge would keep me in the cycle. I want to end this, I said finally. Really end it. So I called them back. I kept the phone on speaker so my husband could hear. Dad answered immediately. Ellie, we need to fix this. Mom tried to talk over him. Honey, we didn't mean anything we said. You misunderstood. Kelvin's voice cut through faintly in the background. Just tell her you're sorry. I'm not coming over, I said calmly. I'm not discussing money, and you will not speak to me the way you did ever again. Silence. A different silence this time, one where they were the ones scrambling for footing. Mom tried again. We were emotional, that's all. I don't want anything from you, I said, and you won't be getting anything from me. Another long, hollow pause. Dad finally said, So that's it? That's it. And I hung up. It was the quietest victory of my life. Not loud, not triumphant. Just free. That afternoon, sunlight glowed across the living room as the last of the snow began to melt outside. I sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders and pulled out the letter I'd found in my childhood bedroom the night before, the scholarship letter they hid from me. The paper was worn at the edges, but the ink was clear, clearer than my memories had ever been. This letter had been the start of their pattern. The first time they decided I didn't need what was mine. The first time they took from me because they assumed I'd never fight back. And now, in my own home, wrapped in warmth they never gave me, I traced its edges slowly. This time, I whispered, I choose myself. I folded the letter gently, set it beside me, and watched the sun break through the clouds. The storm wasn't what almost broke me. It was the house I finally walked away from.